We have Kyra from the University of Sydney entitled, "Can we help cancer carers manage fears and worries about cancer coming back?"
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Thank you to the conference organisers for the opportunity to present today. It's a privilege to be here talking about our program of research, developing an intervention to help carers manage fear and worry about their loved one's cancer coming back or progressing. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this work has predominantly been conducted, the Gadigal and Darawal people, and extend my respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people present today. So given our work has been conducted in cancer carers, I wanted to provide a little context about cancer in Australia. So at present, it's estimated that over 1 million people are living with or beyond a cancer diagnosis. And it's estimated that 71% of people diagnosed with cancer will survive 5 years or beyond diagnosis. And so what we're seeing as a trend is improvement in screening and treatment technologies. So people are being diagnosed earlier, and there are new treatment technologies available, so people are living longer with active disease. And so we know carers play a vital role in supporting people that are living with and beyond a cancer diagnosis. These individuals help people living with cancer physically, emotionally, financially. However, when we look at the research exploring cancer carer experiences, we find that cancer carers report high levels of distress, increased levels of burnout, increased experiences of depression and anxiety, and lower quality of life. And another key concern that cancer carers report is fear of their loved one's cancer coming back or progressing. And so there's been a lot of research conducted in cancer survivors. And so we know what fear of cancer recurrence is characterised in this population. We know that this looks like intrusive thoughts about the cancer coming back or progressing, maladaptive coping strategies such as requesting additional scans or conversely avoiding medical appointments altogether, impairment in function, high distress levels, and difficulty planning for the future. And so my PhD actually looked at carer experiences of fear of recurrence, and we started by conducting these 2 reviews. And essentially, much less is known about carer experiences of fear of recurrence. In a meta-analysis, we were able to estimate that 48% of carers reported high levels of fear and worry that would be deemed clinically significant in people living with cancer. We found that carer fear of recurrence is associated with both depression and anxiety. And when we looked at what support is available for cancer carers experiencing fears and worries about cancer coming back, we found only one intervention with a component addressing fear of recurrence. So essentially, fear of cancer recurrence is as often a problem for cancer carers as it is for people living with cancer. And so when we look at qualitative experiences of cancer carers across the literature and in our research groups interview studies, we find similarities between carer and survivor experiences, namely fear and uncertainty. But we also identified themes that are unique to cancer carers, and these included caregivers' role as protector, fear of losing a loved one, and sense of personal responsibility for the person that they're caring for. And it's these carer-specific aspects of fear of recurrence that are not addressed in current interventions. And so it's clear that we need an intervention to address carer fears and worries. And so we, as a first step, looked at, well, what interventions have been used in people living with cancer. And a very highly used and well-implemented intervention is Conquer Fear, which is a 6-lesson psychologist-delivered intervention for people living with cancer. And it's what we call contemporary cognitive behavioural therapy, so takes traditional elements of CBT and combines these with more contemporary therapeutic approaches, such as acceptance commitment therapy and metacognitive therapy. And there's a lot of evidence supporting this intervention in reducing levels of fear of recurrence in people living with cancer and maintaining these reductions over time. And so we asked, well, with adaptation, could conquer fear be suitable for cancer carers? And so just to give a quick overview of what is included in the original Conquer Fear intervention, the first lesson is essentially an introduction and explains how fear of recurrence develops and is maintained over time. The second lesson discusses the impact of past events, as these are indicated as being a potential precursor to fear of recurrence. And we have our participants complete what we call a card sort task to identify what's important to them. In the next session, they then set goals around these identified values, and we introduce an activity called attention training technique, which is essentially listening to an audio file, and the intention is to increase self-focused attention with the increasing occurrence of different distractions. The fourth lesson introduces some worry management techniques, such as detached mindfulness, to help with triggers of fear of recurrence, so being able to notice stimuli and worrying thoughts and being able to just recognize them without reacting. And we also introduce an activity called worry postponement. The fifth lesson includes information about threat monitoring and avoidance behaviours, and also involves a discussion between the psychologist and the person with cancer about follow-up care guidelines and current compliance, as well as including some information about healthy lifestyle behaviours to reduce the risk of recurrence. And finally, the sixth session includes some information about metacognition, so thoughts about thoughts, what people believe about their worries. So this could be positive, the worry helps me prepare, or it could be negative, if I worry too much, I'll get sick. And finally, the last part of the sixth session is about developing a new plan to manage worry. And so our aim was to adapt the Conquer Fear intervention for cancer carers, and we did this by using a two-phase approach. The first phase looked at the clinical content. So we had a panel of psycho-oncology clinicians and researchers provide feedback about the clinical content, looking at what is relevant, looking at which therapeutic components needed to be retained, and also where carer-specific components needed to be added. And we adapted the intervention to be online using a digital storytelling approach, which followed carer experiences. I'll go into a little bit more detail about exactly what that is in the following slides. So just an overview of how we actually adapted the intervention content. Here you can see all of the elements that were retained. So that attention training techniques, for example, detached mindfulness, those therapeutic components were included in the carer intervention. Here you can see the elements that we removed. So we took out the information about lifestyle recommendations, compliance with follow-up care, and some of the other specifics there. And here you can see the components that we added that were carer specific. So we added information about carer threat monitoring. We also added information about communication, as this was really key to carer experiences of fear of recurrence. We also added information about support sources, carer worry cycle, so explaining how fear of recurrence develops for carers and is maintained, and also a communication checklist. And so the second phase of our research, it was to explore carer preferences towards an online fear of recurrence intervention. And so we recruited partners, friends and family members of a person diagnosed with cancer or recurrence in the last 5 years. We had them complete an online survey, including some demographics and other relevant questionnaires, and then they participated in a telephone interview where we had questions exploring fears about recurrence, preferences for program structure and delivery, as well as barriers and facilitators to completing the online intervention. And then we analyse the qualitative data using a framework method, which is where we take the interviews that were transcribed verbatim. We look at the kind of themes that are coming up, and we then group and define these. And so we had 14 carers participate in an interview, and here's just a quick snapshot of some of the demographic data. And I hope what you can get an idea of is that we had a mix of relationships represented and also carers providing care for people with different cancer types and at different cancer stages. And so I'll briefly go through the results. We had 4 kind of key themes with additional sub-themes identified. So our first theme was the fear of cancer recurrence experience. And this really captured the ever-present fears that carers had. Some of these were really specific around fear of further treatment and what that might mean for prognosis, fear of being alone, a shift in planning for the future, and the experience of cancer-related stimuli triggering worries and fears. Our second theme looked at how carers actually managed their fears and worries. And so a lot of carers reported a need to prepare for the worst, engaging in protective monitoring, so watching the person that they're caring for closely to check for any signs that could be indicative of recurrence or progression. A lot of carers coped by engaging in different activities that would take their mind off of their fears and worries. And additionally, a lot of carers reported seeking support through online support groups. Our third theme looked at the impact on communication. So this really captured a conspiracy of silence between the person with cancer and the carer. You know, both members feeling really quite fearful about recurrence or progression, but not feeling able to talk to the other about these. And a lot of carers reported that they felt quite unsupported and isolated and weren't sure where to turn to talk to someone about these fears and worries. And our fourth theme looked at mental health help seeking. So a lot of carers reflected on their experiences with seeking mental health support. And here we had some questions and some information reported about preferences for an online program, you know, benefits for an online format, specific preferences around engagement and guided versus self-management, as well as providing some feedback on the character scenario and look options. And so just to zoom in here on our fourth theme regarding the online program preferences, a lot of participants are reported feeling open to using an online program, and some of the advantages that they perceived from an online program included a sense of privacy, flexibility and agency over when they could access support, and also remove difficulties associated with travel for traditional in-person interventions. When we looked at the character scenarios, a lot of carers reported a sense of comfort gained from reading these storylines. Some of the barriers that carers identified was a potential loss of rapport building that would typically take place in a traditional face-to-face psychology session. They had concerns about intervention tailoring and their experiences being reflected. And also there was potential barriers to online participation, so accessing internet. However, carers also reported that they felt this intervention would be a valuable stepping stone for further support if it was needed. And so to give a brief overview of the adapted intervention, which we call Carer Conquer Fear, we have an introductory session again about fear of recurrence, and attention training techniques are included in this first lesson. We have a second lesson which covers identifying values, so that values clarification activity that I described before and the goal setting combined into one lesson. We then have a coaching call scheduled between lessons 2 and 3 to support intervention completion. Our third lesson looks at worry management techniques, so including that detached mindfulness and worry postponement, giving carers strategies to help them manage their worries and fears. And finally, we have a fourth lesson on communicating concerns, and this covers those monitoring and protected behaviours, as well as information about communicating concerns and worries, giving kind of language and information about how to communicate about this and where they can seek support, and then finally finishing with a review session to create a new plan for managing worry moving forward. And so I've just included a couple of screen grabs from our intervention. So this is when I'm referring to a digital storytelling approach, this is kind of what we're looking at. So it's a flat lay format completed online via our website. And so we just have our narrator character here who is introducing the online program, just covering what's included in that first lesson. And we also have a psychologist character who introduces and talks about some of the theoretical components and also covers some of the therapeutic components too. And so here's an example slide of the kind of character look options that we presented. So in developing the character scenarios, these were informed by a series of interviews that we completed with cancer carers on a previous occasion. And we looked at what kind of behaviours that carers engage in, what kind of strategies they use to manage their fears, and group these together to develop some storylines. And it was really key for us to get feedback on these to ensure that carers felt that their worries and fears were kind of represented across one of the different characters. And then we also obtained feedback about look preferences for these characters. And so just to briefly introduce the carer characters, the finalised versions, we had Phil caring for his wife Lily, who was diagnosed with breast cancer. The couple live in a regional location, so capturing some of the difficulties associated with that. There's Sophie, who has a previous experience caring for her daughter, who was diagnosed with cancer during her early 20s. And finally, Aisha, who has experience caring for her husband. The couple also share 3 young children, so capturing the concurrent caring role that we know so many carers have. And so some key takeaways. It's really critical that we address carer-specific concerns when we're developing psychological interventions. As a result, we've developed a theoretically informed carer-specific program, which we call Care Conquer Fear. It consists of 4 lessons, which are completed over 4 weeks, and it follows the 3 carer character storylines using that digital storytelling approach. And Care Conquer Fear is ready for pilot testing. So we have plans to complete a pre-post study to assess the feasibility and acceptability of this intervention later in the year. I'd just like to thank all of the carers who have so generously volunteered their time to participate in these studies, the amazing research team who have been involved in this, and just acknowledge the funding from Sydney Cancer Partners that allows us to conduct this work. I'm not sure if we've got time for questions, but thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Kyra? I've got about 1,000.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. Very interesting. I just wonder, as a carer, how would I find out about this program?
How would you find out?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're planning on advertising. We need to pilot this program first to look at whether it's effective in, well, first, whether it's feasible and acceptable for carers. And then I guess as a secondary aim, whether it's effective in reducing fear of recurrence, which we plan to evaluate in the future, hopefully in a randomized control trial. In terms of finding out about that in the initial phases, we'll probably advertise this widely across kind of carer support organisations, as well as online through Facebook and Instagram ads. That's kind of our plan for the moment, and then in the future, that's kind of to be determined where this will sit. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And one more question. Is in that program somewhere a section where you're dealing with the grief that carers experience in recognizing the condition of the person they're caring for?
Yeah, of course. That's a really important question. And that's something that we've definitely considered and thought about across our interviews. We don't have a specific component addressing that. We have information about support resources where carers can access additional support if that's something that they're going through. That's weaved in kind of all throughout the intervention.
Thank you. I have lots of questions. I might save them for lunch,
That's okay.
particularly around where likelihood of recurrence is clinically high.
Yeah.
But we'll chat more about that over lunch. Thank you, Kyra. Please, everyone.
Thank you.